The rehearsal had gone well. That was the thing that made what happened next more difficult to explain. Because when things go well in a television rehearsal, they go well in a specific and bounded way. The arrangement works, the timing is right, the levels are correct, and nothing is required of anyone beyond the professional. What happened next was not in the arrangement. It was not in the timing. It did not belong to the level of the professional at all. The band had run through the arrangement twice, and the levels were good, and Aretha Franklin had come through the first pass with the particular quality of control that her rehearsals always had. Not a full performance, not the thing itself, but the shape of the thing, the outline of it, made with a precision that told everyone in the studio exactly what was coming when the cameras were live. The floor manager had been satisfied, the sound engineer had nodded, the lights were set, the production machinery of a major television program had done its work and declared itself ready. And then Tom Jones sang. Not a run-through, not the shape of the thing. He sang the way he sang when the room required it, completely, without holding back, as though the camera were already rolling and the audience were already present, and there were nothing between him and the music except the music itself. The band, which had been doing its professional job of executing an arrangement, adjusted in real time to what was happening, the way musicians adjust when something that was supposed to be a rehearsal has become something else entirely. The drummer found a different pulse. The keys shifted their weight. The room changed. Aretha Franklin stood at the side of the stage and listened. When Tom finished, the room did the thing rooms do in those moments. A brief suspension. The collective breath of people who have just received something they were not fully prepared for, even in a space designed precisely for music. And then Aretha said 3 words. Do it again. Not a request, not a suggestion from one performer to another, delivered with the social courtesy that professional settings required. A statement, a directive, the kind of words that came from someone who had heard something that she needed to hear again, because the first time had not given her enough time to understand it completely. The floor manager opened his mouth and then closed it. The band looked at one another. Tom looked at Aretha. The room was very quiet for a second, the particular quiet of people waiting to understand what was happening. Tom did it again. Exactly. Tom Jones, in the context of 1969 pop music, occupied a category that was comfortable and comprehensible and not entirely accurate. He was a Las Vegas headliner. He was a British invasion pop star with enormous commercial success and a television show watched by millions on both sides of the Atlantic. He was the kind of performer that the serious music press of 1969 had a tendency to underestimate. Too popular, too mainstream, too much a product of the entertainment machinery to be treated as an artist in the way that the word artist was being used at that particular cultural moment. What that underestimation missed was the voice itself, not the fame around it, not the machinery producing it, not the category it had been assigned to, but the specific physical fact of the instrument. Tom Jones had a voice that had not been shaped by formal training and had not been produced by the kind of careful commercial calculation that manufactured pop sounds. It had come from Wales and from the specific tradition of Welsh choral music, and from whatever the conjunction of those origins and his particular physiology and some quality of character that was entirely his own had produced. It was raw in the specific sense of something that had not been processed, not raw in the sense of unfinished, but raw in the sense of direct, of being the thing itself rather than a representation of the thing. Aretha Franklin heard that when he sang. The second time Tom performed, at her request, in a rehearsal room that had gone very quiet, in front of a band that understood something unusual was happening. The room had the particular quality of a space in which something is being examined with great care. Aretha was not passive. She watched with the specific attention of a musician listening for something specific, tracking a voice the way a trained ear tracks a voice, for where it placed the vowels, how it handled the transitions between registers, where it chose to push and where it chose to hold back. She was listening for the seams. Every voice has seams, the places where training ends and instinct begins, the places where the calculation shows through. She was listening for Tom Jones's seams. What she found was that the seams were not where she had expected them to be. The technique was different from hers. The tradition that had produced it was different in almost every particular. Welsh, not Southern. Pop, not gospel. Produced by a working-class town in the valleys rather than by a Baptist church in Detroit. And the fundamental quality was the same. The voice could not pretend. It made the same commitments hers made, complete, unreserved, incapable of performing an emotion it was not actually producing at that moment. When the second performance ended, she did not immediately say anything. She stood at the side of the stage for a moment in the particular silence of someone processing something they were not yet ready to speak about. Then she nodded once, a small, specific gesture that the musicians who knew her understood as something other than casual approval. The cameras rolled later that day. What was captured on film was two performers sharing a stage with the specific ease of people who had, in a rehearsal room that morning, established something that did not need to be stated again. This is Tom Jones. In 1969 was, among other things, a program about what happened when the separate kingdoms of American popular music were placed in the same room. Those kingdoms were rarely in the same room in 1969. Radio formats were specific and jealously maintained. Concert tours did not mix genres in ways that challenged the organization of the audience. The industry that packaged and distributed music worked very hard to ensure that its categories remained legible, that the audience for one kind of music did not need to think very carefully about its relationship to another kind of music entirely. The show did not respect those categories. Tom Jones had never particularly respected them either, not because he had a theory about music, not because he had decided that genre was a commercial construct that needed dismantling, but because the voices that interested him most tended to come from places that were not located on his side of the Atlantic. Soul music, rhythm and blues, the gospel tradition, the specific quality of a voice trained in a black church in the American South and then directed at a popular audience. These were not things that Pontypridd, Wales had provided him. They were things he had found, the way he found everything that interested him, by paying attention to what his own voice was drawn toward. Aretha Franklin in 1969 was not simply a successful recording artist. She was something more specific and more significant than that. She was the voice that had defined the moment in which soul music had crossed from a community music to a cultural force that the entire country was required to hear. Respect, in 1967, had done something to American popular culture that went beyond the song itself. It had established a claim on attention, on recognition, on the terms under which women and black Americans asked to be received, that the rest of popular music was still processing 2 years later. She had been raised in music the way very few people are raised in music, not as a student of it, but as a native inhabitant of it. Born into a family where music was the primary language, and where the standards of excellence were established by voices that had been refined across generations. Her father was a Baptist minister and one of the most celebrated preachers in Detroit. Her godmother was Mahalia Jackson. She had grown up hearing what a voice could do when it operated at the level of the serious rather than the commercial, when it carried not just a song, but the weight of everything the song was trying to hold. By the time she arrived on the "This Is Tom Jones" set, she had learned to make that weight invisible. The discipline was so complete that it no longer read as discipline. It read as authority, as inevitability, as the particular quality of a voice that knew what it was doing because it had been doing it since before it had a name for what it was doing. She came to every room she entered as a professional of the highest order. She came expecting professionalism in return. She had not come expecting what she heard. Tom Jones spoke about Aretha Franklin across many decades with a consistency that is itself a form of testimony. He did not sentimentalize. He did not position her as an influence in the way that performers sometimes position their influencers, at a distance and in the past tense. He spoke about her in the present tense, even after her death in 2018, the way he spoke about things that were still actively operating in him. What she had required of him that morning, that he do it again, that he perform at full capacity for the second time in a rehearsal room, in front of the person whose opinion he most wanted to earn in that particular moment, was one of the more exacting forms of recognition his career had ever received. A compliment from an audience was one kind of thing. A directive from Aretha Franklin, delivered in 3 words in a room that had gone quiet, was something else entirely. It meant she had heard something she needed to verify. It meant the first time had not been enough to contain what she had heard. It meant she was taking him seriously in the precise, technical, professional way that she took seriously the things that mattered. The second time was not enough either. Not because the performance was insufficient, because what she was hearing was not a thing that could be fully contained or fully measured by any number of repetitions. It was simply a voice. It was simply the fact of a voice that did not know how to lie. Aretha Franklin had lived in that place her entire life. She had been born into it and trained in it and had spent every year of her career working to preserve it against the pressures of an industry that rewarded everything around the voice while sometimes being indifferent to the voice itself. She knew what it sounded like when it was genuinely there. She knew what it sounded like when it was being performed rather than inhabited. She also knew something else that the music press of 1969 was not yet fully prepared to articulate, that the black church tradition and the Welsh choral tradition had more in common than their geographies suggested. Both were built on the voice as a communal instrument, the voice as the thing a community used to say what it could not otherwise say, to hold what it could not otherwise hold, to survive what it was being asked to survive. Tom Jones had come from a tradition that understood the voice as a form of testimony rather than a form of entertainment. Aretha had come from a tradition that understood exactly the same thing and had never required anyone to explain the difference to her. What she heard in Tom Jones's voice that morning was not what the television program had advertised, and not what the pop charts had cataloged, and not what the Las Vegas booking agency had sold. What she heard was the testimony underneath all of that. The thing that had come from Pontypridd, from the mining valleys, from the choir tradition that was the only stage his community had ever offered him. The thing he had been singing since before he had a name for what he was doing, and that he would be singing long after the shows and the residencies and the television programs had run their course. When she heard the real thing coming from a Welsh man in a sharp suit who had spent the night before headlining a Las Vegas showroom, she had done the only thing that made sense. She asked to hear it again.